Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about motivation. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, are you motivated by a challenging project? And would you say that software engineers in general are motivated by challenging projects? I can only speak for myself, but yes, and I usually find that the passionate fire soul type of people who really like software engineering and are really nerdy about it, they absolutely love this, and I would count myself as one of those people. Uh, I think a lot of software developers enjoy having a challenging project, but it depends on the challenge usually. The thing that I usually see is that the software developers who work on a high complexity problem where either the logic is fairly sophisticated or the feature is fairly sophisticated, uh, they can in many cases love doing that. But the thing that is not so interesting to a lot of people, because like that requires a lot of brain power or like a lot of focus and concentration and general, well, it requires you to think very intensely about the logical parts of a problem. But there are a lot of it depends on how you want to look at it, because to me a complex, like a challenging project, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is fairly sophisticated logically. It can be something that is fairly sophisticated, like in terms of, say, legacy code, or it's something where architecture is extremely important, because if you model things incorrectly, for example, you get a really shitty system, and so forth and so forth. And usually I find that the software developers who are fairly mediocre, uh, they don't really like it's sort of it's really not so much a question of do they feel engaged in and motivated by the challenge of the project. It depends on the type of challenge that they are dealing with, if that makes sense. So like I'll take myself as an example where I can get really nerdy and excited about having to deal with a sophisticated logical issue, but I can also get fairly happy when I can take care of a system that is fairly poorly maintained or something like that and make it into something nice. But at the same time, if I look at the range of what projects you usually have, it sort of tells a story that I think is fairly true for a lot of the industry, where if you look at the proportions of challenging projects that you have around the world or in most companies, usually projects have an issue with quality and sustainability, bugs, these sorts of things. And it's very rare that you find that you have these fairly sophisticated logical problems where you have to do something fairly complicated. And the thing is that, as I said, one is usually the thing that people get excited about, but the other one is something that they just look at as a problem. They don't really get excited about making a well-working system. And I can just say that I wouldn't murder for it, but I truly wish that at some point I would like just get to work on a project where the project wasn't challenging because the because of these obvious things that usually come because you deal with mediocre software developers, or people, I don't want to call them mediocre, but people who don't understand these fundamentals of writing efficient software. Like an example would be, you usually have fairly low levels of quality in testing and quality levels in work processes or processes within like how the overall system behaves. These are usually the things that most software teams are struggling with: basic architecture, basic quality assurance, these sorts of things, right? And to me, like that is the number one. It's the most challenging problem that every single software team faces. Number one. Yet I never really meet anyone who is all that good at managing that problem. it's insane to me because when you if you gone through the same sort of education that I have, the thing you get told usually coming up through the courses is that unit testing, for example, is important, or if it doesn't work or so forth, that's not good. So you should make sure that your code is testable, etc., etc. Like, these things are just things that most people say. If you go and work at the average software company with the average team, this is not what's happening, because it's the equivalent to me. To me, it is, at the very least, it's the equivalent of cleaning at home. It's something that you need to do, you should be doing, but you don't do it because you're a lazy bum, or you feel like you don't have to, or so forth and so forth. And it's or like exercising regularly. Like, usually people get fat these days because they don't actually, like, they can't even muster in eating sort of healthy and like putting in 30 minutes a day or something like that, because they don't get excited about that problem. And that's the thing. That's not an exciting problem to deal with. It's just quote unquote work, and that's the thing that most people don't really see. And I personally, I can get excited by both, but at this point I think it's more a question of that I have gotten to a point where every single time I start in a project, doesn't matter which one it is, I get to usually either work with, and this is where I get really happy, if I get to work with someone who's truly competent in this area, because the issue is that most systems are challenging because of this issue, because of neglect, basically, because of these basic things not working well within the code base. And the sort of problems that most people get excited about, the quote-unquote cool projects or the challenging projects and so forth and so forth, those projects they're far and wide between. Like, it's not that common that you have them, but even so, when you deal with when you get to deal with such a specifically, like, logically challenging problem, it is fun for a while. But the same thing happens over time, which is the thing that I think most people don't understand. At some point, that's going to be a solved problem. It doesn't matter how logically hard it is, because sooner or later you're either going to run out of money or you're going to solve the problem. If it's a search algorithm or a compiler, or it doesn't really matter what it is. It can be any, call whatever you want, right? And the problem that always comes back and always continues being a challenge is this basic problem. How do you create a clean architecture? How do you sustain complexity over time? Or, like, how do you keep the complexity low over time? These are things that I at one point was very excited to figure out and solve, and I feel like I sort of have gotten to that point. And then I found that I am very alone in finding that to be an interesting problem. And today it's sort of like, you have something you like eating all the time, or like something you like drinking all the time, and now you have so much of it that you're starting to get fucking sick of it, because it's all you ever have to drink or eat. And that's how I feel about this problem. It's getting to be annoying to me, and it's not because it's not because I don't like solving the problem. It is because I feel I'm always alone in caring about solving that problem. In every single team I ever join, usually. Luckily for me, I've reached to a point now where I actually have some authority, so I can make the other software developers understand that, yes, I expect you to talk to your coworkers when you create new libraries or frameworks. Yes, I expect you to write unit tests. And no, you don't get to suck at it. I'm sorry, then you go and work somewhere else. So what I want you to take away from this is that a lot of developers feel very happy when they get to work on a challenging project, but it really comes down to the nature of the project, because there's a lot of challenges in software development. So a sexy problem is, as I was saying, something that is usually very logically complicated, or something that requires you to really come up with a clever solution. But challenging code, like a really shitty legacy systems or architecture or things like that, that just quote unquote adds, like, it just feels like extra work. It's not a sexy problem. Very few software developers care about solving those sorts of, and they don't get motivated by solving those problems. I've done that for quite some time now, and I find basically that to be a very interesting problem as well. It's just that at this point I've done it so many times that it feels very trivial to me to do so, and now it's getting to the point where I realize that this is actually something that most software teams struggle with at all times. Basically, I've never seen an exception to this rule, which brings me to the thing that I was saying, and that means that I get to test my cut my teeth on these sorts of issues, but I've done this so many times now that it's almost getting annoying. But the thing is, I'm not getting annoyed by the problem. I'm getting annoyed at that the people who are supposed to be able to do this, like these so-called professionals, have a problem with this issue, and it very usually comes down to, as I said, a lack of either, you can call it whatever you want, but the reality is that even the most basic things like writing unit tests or things like that are things that doesn't always happen organically. It's not something that you see every software developer do, and to me that's sort of like, yeah, I don't understand why. Well, I understand why, because people are lazy, and it really comes down to that. You have to, in many cases, force people to deal with this problem because they're not going to get motivated and do it by themselves, which is the number one excuse I hear, especially by the front-end developers. And listen up now. If I ask a front-end developer, how do you do testing? And most of them say, I don't. And then they follow up with, it was never a requirement in my old project. And I go, so you're expecting your non-technical manager to force you to do it because you don't care enough to do it, even though you're supposed to be doing it. That's like a doctor or a surgeon not washing their hands before operating on a patient, and then standing in trial in court and saying, after that person dies of a massive infection or something like that, and just going, yeah, usually it's fine. That's how I look at it, and that's the problem that I wish more people were excited to solve. Have a great day.